European imperialism was not accepted quietly. Across Asia, foreign rule brought railroads, trade, and new technologies, but it also brought humiliation, cultural erosion, and violence. When pressure reached a breaking point, resistance followed. Two of the most important responses to imperialism were the Indian Rebellion of 1857 and the Boxer Rebellion in China. Both were explosive, both failed militarily, and both permanently reshaped imperial rule. By the mid-1800s, Britain controlled much of India, not directly through the crown at first, but through the British East India Company, a private corporation with its own army. Indian soldiers known as Sepoys made up most of that army. Resentment had not appeared overnight. It accumulated slowly as Britain ruled with a confidence that often bordered on arrogance. Indigenous laws, religious practices, and social traditions were dismissed as backward or inconvenient, rather than understood as the foundations of Indian society. British officials interfered with sacred customs, removed Indian rulers, and annexed territories with little regard for local authority or legitimacy. At the same time, traditional industries were deliberately undermined, flooded with British manufactured goods that displaced artisans and weakened local economies. By the 1850s, British rule was no longer experienced as distant administration. It was felt as cultural intrusion, economic disruption, and political dispossession, conditions that made rebellion not only possible but inevitable. One policy in particular intensified resentment, the doctrine of lapse. Under this doctrine, if an Indian ruler died without a biological male heir, Britain seized the kingdom, regardless of long-standing Indian adoption traditions. To Indian elites, this was theft disguised as law, but the final spark came from something symbolic and deeply offensive. In 1857, Sepoys were issued new rifle cartridges rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, offensive to both Hindus and Muslims. Soldiers were required to bite the cartridges open. To the British, this was a logistical detail. To Indian soldiers, it was cultural desecration.
They told us it was progress. They told us the company brought order. But how can there be order when you ask a man to bite into his own soul? Cow fat, pig fat, an insult to every Hindu and Muslim who wore your uniform.
It was a technical necessity for the Enfield rifle, Pandy. From London, we did not see a soul. We saw a breach of contract. You took our pay. You wore our red coat. And then you turned our guns on us.
The revolt spread with stunning speed. Sepoys turned their weapons against their officers, and the rebellion quickly moved beyond the barracks. Civilians joined the uprising, towns erupted in violence, and British officials and their families became direct targets. For a brief moment, the foundations of British rule in India appeared to crack. What had begun as a military mutiny threatened to become the collapse of an empire. Britain responded with overwhelming force, determined to restore control at any cost. Reprisals were swift and brutal. Villages suspected of aiding rebels were collectively punished, and executions were carried out publicly, meant not only to kill, but to warn. Order was reimposed, but at a price that deepened resentment and ensured the rebellion would not be forgotten. The rebellion was ultimately crushed, but its consequences were profound. The British East India Company was dissolved, ending corporate rule in India and placing the subcontinent under the direct authority of the British Crown. Administration became more centralized, surveillance more constant, and military presence more permanent. British rule grew more cautious in its approach to Indian customs, but far more authoritarian in its control. Order was reimposed, but at a price that deepened resentment and ensured the rebellion would not be forgotten. The rebellion failed on the battlefield, but it forced Britain to reshape India, and in doing so, it reshaped the future.
You think you won because you reorganized the government, but you centralized our resentment. You gave us the telegraph, and eventually we used it to coordinate your departure. You gave us your language, and we used it to demand our freedom.
China faced imperialism differently. China still remembered the Opium Wars, conflicts in which foreign powers had forced open Chinese ports, flooded the country with addictive drugs, and dictated unequal treaties at gunpoint. Rather than full colonization, China was carved into spheres of influence, regions controlled economically and politically by foreign powers. Missionaries arrived, foreign merchants dominated trade, Western customs spread. To many Chinese citizens, this felt like invasion without conquest. What followed wasn't diplomacy, it was the carving up of the Mandarin pie, every empire demanding a slice. The result was not just economic damage, but deep humiliation and loss of sovereignty. Who were the Boxers? The Boxers were members of a secret society known as the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. To them, foreign influence represented far more than economic pressure. It was a cultural and spiritual threat. They believed that outsiders were corrupting China, weakening long-held traditions, and undermining the moral order that had defined Chinese society for generations. Many Boxers also believed that through martial arts training, ritual, and spiritual discipline, they could protect themselves from foreign weapons. These beliefs gave the movement confidence and unity, but also left it dangerously unprepared for the modern military force it would soon confront. Their slogan was clear: support the Qing, destroy the foreign.
You came with Bibles in one hand and opium in the other. You tore down our shrines to build your churches. You told us our spirits had no power. The world was shrinking, Lin Hai. China was a closed door, and we turned the handle. We brought the telegraph, the steamship, global trade. Iron bridges spanning rivers, steam locomotives cutting through countryside, telegraph wires stretching across landscapes. Progress, clean, powerful, and I shall say, imposing.
The violence spread quickly. Boxers targeted foreign diplomats, Christian missionaries, and Chinese converts, groups they viewed as symbols of foreign intrusion and betrayal. At first, the Qing government hesitated, uncertain whether the movement represented dangerous chaos or a useful expression of popular resistance. Eventually, it offered limited support. That decision proved disastrous. In response, an 8-nation alliance, including Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, and the United States, sent troops into China, turning a domestic uprising into an international invasion. The Boxer Rebellion ultimately collapsed under the pressure of foreign invasion. In its aftermath, China was forced to accept harsh terms that deepened its humiliation. Massive reparations were imposed, foreign troops were granted permanent stationing on Chinese soil, and imperial powers expanded their control even further into China's political and economic life. What began as resistance ended by tightening the grip of empire. The Boxers' resistance was fueled by nationalism and cultural defense, but lack of modern weapons and unity doomed the movement. Instead of expelling imperial powers, the rebellion deepened China's weakness and exposed the Qing dynasty's fragility.
You burned our summer palace. You fined us 450 million taels of silver for the privilege of you killing our brothers. We wanted predictability. After the Boxers, China was finally opened to the world. No longer defiant, no longer uncertain, but regulated, monitored, and accessible on terms the global order could rely on. A peace that felt like a cage.
Despite occurring in different regions and decades, both rebellions shared important characteristics. Each emerged as a response to cultural intrusion and political domination, and both drew strength from popular participation rather than elite leadership alone. In each case, resistance was met with overwhelming force and brutal suppression by imperial powers determined to maintain control. Their outcomes, however, diverged in meaning. In India, rebellion prompted the consolidation of imperial authority, leading to more centralized and authoritarian rule under the British Crown. In China, the uprising exposed the deep weakness of the Qing dynasty and accelerated its decline, pushing the empire closer to collapse. Neither rebellion ended imperialism, but both revealed a hard truth about empire. Resistance would be met with overwhelming force. When revolts failed, they did not bring compromise. They brought tighter control, heavier surveillance, and diminished sovereignty. Imperial powers learned to rule more cautiously, but also more aggressively, ensuring that future challenges would be crushed before they could threaten the system itself. Imperialism did not succeed because it was welcomed. It survived because it had superior weapons, global alliances, and economic leverage. Resistance often fails in the short term, but reshapes history in the long run. These rebellions foreshadowed the nationalist movements of the 20th century that would finally dismantle empires.
Alas, history is written in the ledgers of the victors. No, history is written in the blood of those who refuse to be forgotten.
History is not only something we study, it is something we are living through. In a world flooded with headlines, memes, and viral claims, the past offers a vital tool. Apply OPCVL to everything you see. Ask who created it, why it exists, and whose perspective it represents. As AI-generated images, voices, and videos make it increasingly difficult to distinguish what is real from what is fabricated, this skill becomes essential. The future will favor those who slow down, question what they are shown, and demand evidence before belief. History does not teach us what to think. It teaches us how to search for the truth.
Stay curious. Stay tuned.
Thanks for watching.